Well, good morning to our many fans. Let me give you the headlines for today, and then I'll go over to Pat. The headlines we'll start off with will be that Stardust inquiry, which came to some conclusions
Yeah.
yesterday. Um, BBC's Nick Robinson and the use of the word murder, and the kind of people that the 26 counties, not to be confused with Ireland, are sending to Europe. Those are three topics well worth exploring. Good morning to you, Pat. Are you extremely well this morning? Are you feeling jovial,
I am
hot?
extremely well this morning, Dr. Collins, the austere Dr. Collins.
Yes, that's a
Maybe
reference to.
hold on. Maybe I should explain the in
Yes,
joke
yes.
here.
Explain
We have
yourself.
we have got a mutual friend, a guy called Jim Sharkey, who used to be a very senior guy in the Department of Foreign Affairs, but he's a dairyman and he's known to both of us. And he was watching our podcast
As all good people do.
in Italy there yesterday, I think it was, and he sent back a critique where he said Dr. Collins came across as austere, and I came across as a man of the people. How right he was.
You left off all the other nice stuff he said about
I
me.
know, but I'm not going to give you the credit.
So how do you explain? How do you explain? I sent you a little screen grab of about eight episodes of our
Yeah,
podcast. By the way, is it podcast or vlog? I don't think we're really a podcast,
I
Podcast
don't know
sort
what the
of
hell we are,
assumes
to
that
tell you
you're
the
just
truth.
the sound. We're sound and
Yeah,
vision. And I think they call
yeah.
that a vlog,
I
VLOG.
haven't a clue, Jude.
Anyway, a
Whatever.
rose by any other name would smell as
Yeah,
sweet.
yeah,
What were we
yeah.
talking about before I distracted you there?
We're talking about. I well, we can do the Stardust inquiry. We can
Uh,
do the characters we sent off. We can do
that
Nick Robinson.
Yeah, that wasn't what we were talking about. You've obviously forgotten as well as me. Okay, let's go. First of all, the Stardust inquiry. Very. I remember that time, 1981, I think it was, and I feel
Yeah,
very, very sad for the families. I feel sad for the victims. Must have been a horrific death, where the
uh,
entire place just caught fire owing to some electrical fault. Kids were found their bodies piled up near the exit as they tried to get out. Many of the exits were chained, and there was all sorts of bad stuff. So it was a terrible, bad story. But somehow the victims, the families of the victims, and their lawyer were very positive about what came out yesterday, because I saw them on TV, and you may well have seen them too,
yeah.
roaring at last. And that sums it up for me, at last. And Simon Harris said it's one of the darkest moments in our history and described it as a heartbreaking tragedy. Now, allow me to be austere and a little bit critical. It was a very, very sad thing, and you'd have to have a heart of stone before you wouldn't sympathise with the poor people who died and the families who've been struggling all these years to get the truth to come out. Two things that strike me. One is I simply don't understand. Now, I know they feel it, but I don't understand how this matters so much that they get a statement that says, "Oh yeah, it was an electrical fault. It was nothing to do with you. There wasn't anybody who set fire or anything like that." That if that was my daughter or my son there, I wouldn't find any consolation in that at all. I don't think.
No,
The other thing is, I think that people sometimes use words very loosely. Taoiseach Simon Harris has said one of the darkest moments in our history. Well, maybe, and it was a heartbreaking tragedy. Like, whose heart is he talking about being broken? Of course, the hearts of the families are broken. But Simon Harris's heart isn't broken, that is certain. He may be sympathetic, he may be compassionate, but his heart, how could your heart be broken for people who are dead even before you probably were born?
mm,
That's my rant, for my austere rant on that particular topic.
yeah.
What do you think, Pat?
No, Jude, I was working on RT at the time when that happened, and it was a massive, massive. 48 people dead, most of them young people. There
All
was
right.
one girl I can't. No point in me trying to remember names, but she was the Stardust orphan. She was 17 months old. Her mother and father went out to. They'd rarely been out after she was born, but they went out this night to Stardust, and they didn't come home. They were, I think, they might have been about the eldest there. They were only in their 20s. There was families with two and three. I think there was one family, two daughters and a son died in it, etc., etc., etc. But here's the thing, Jude. At the time, I was when I was in RT, I was sent down to the Dáil for the debates on the days following the fire. And there was one thing, Charlie Howe, for some reason, blocked the Department of Environment, in other words, those who were responsible for the fire services,
Yeah.
from taking part in the inquiry at the time.
Oh,
Now,
really?
nobody knows to this day why he did that or whatever. Now, there's all sorts of conspiracy theories, and Jude, whether they were accurate or not accurate, that whatever, that Charlie had some ulterior motive for doing this and so
So
on.
what
But
what
Jude,
what
the question,
possible motive? What possible motive could he have had? And what
well, you see,
department again was it?
Jude, I don't know whether this is true. I really genuinely don't know this is true. There was some claim that if the Department of the Environment had a report saying that the building was unsafe and so on, and it
Yeah.
shouldn't have been, that if that was brought up at an inquiry, who overruled they should go carry on having a big disco on the Stardust? And Charlie was the TD for that particular area, so
Ah.
he could have, and he was a minister. So now,
Hmm. Hmm.
Jude, this is all conspiracy. Look,
Aye.
the
Aye.
biggest
Aye.
load of bollocks. So let's get that on
Yeah.
the record.
Yeah.
I'm not going
Okay.
to
Well,
try
that's fair
and
enough.
try and
That's
stand over it. But these are the sort of stuff. Now, Charlie Hawley's dead, so he can't come back and defend himself. So I don't know.
hmm.
But at the time, but Jude, the reason why I'm going down this road is I would like to know, and I'm sure a lot of people, did it take 1981? What did it take to 2024 to get an inquest?
Well, you see, we're so used to that kind of thing in the north.
And
It's all
who's covering it up? Whose interest was there
exactly.
you
Yeah.
know?
Cui bono. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. It seems absurd that long would be taken and that the families in some way would be suffering. But I can't quite understand why was it. And I know this happens in the north too, where families have been killed by the security forces or the IRA or whatever. Uh, why do they get such comfort from certain verdicts being brought out, guilty or uh, negligence or electrical fault or whatever? Why? How is it that that seems to be a source of enormous comfort? And they were even jubilant yesterday. I watched them on TV. Many of them were
yeah.
really delighted, even cheering. To me, that I cannot understand that.
Well, there is one. There was one claim going at the time or shortly afterwards that it was arson.
Oh
So in
yes.
other words, somebody in the place set
Oh,
fire to it.
hmm,
Now, you see, the thing about that would be that it could have been your daughter or your son was the person responsible. So
hmm.
there was almost, these people might
Uh,
not be totally innocent here,
okay,
right?
fair enough. Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, so they said yesterday it was a fault in a hot press or something in
Yes,
the building.
electrical fault. Yeah, yeah,
So in other words, nobody set fire to it. So it wasn't your son or your
yeah,
daughter. No, there's that
yeah,
sort of what would you say? What's the word, Jude? A sort of guilt thing hanging over it. I know it might have been your son started, so
yeah,
therefore you're
yeah.
not as innocent as you're letting on, or you
Uh,
think he's there.
uh, uh,
So
did,
that's
did,
that. I presume that is why they said yesterday when it was the inquest found that it was an electrical
uh,
fault that had been traced back to a hot press apparently, and
yeah.
that it was nobody's fault. That so therefore the black mark against the name of anybody had been removed.
Well,
Jude, I was listening. I was driving on from Derry yesterday home, and it was on RT. Jude, I don't think anybody's jumping for joy. There's some of the stories, Jude, would have taken tears
I
from a
know,
stone.
I know, I
Absolutely.
know, I know. I'm,
Old women with 2 and 3 children missing, and a wee girl went out with her, I think it was her 2 sisters. None of them came back. Ah, jeez, Jude, it's terrible. Absolutely. And I
they
mean
never.
terrible,
That's their slogan on their banners.
yeah,
I think they never came
yeah.
back. Uh,
Uh,
it was a shocking thing. At the back of my mind is this: there'll be people certainly down the country uh, who would look at this and say, "Ah, that's terrible, sad," but they'd be thinking about them as being really. That's the kind of thing happens with a bunch of couriers or living in that sort of
yeah,
place in Dublin. I think now maybe I'm doing people an injustice, but I suspect there's an element of that. There was no
yeah.
doctors' children there. There were no dentists' children there. There were no lawyers'
Uh,
children there. They were
the
just
professional classes.
ordinary people. And
Yeah.
I think to that extent, maybe they didn't get the kind of sympathy or that maybe there
You
wasn't.
you must have been listening because somebody said yesterday, Jude, and now I'm struggling to remember. Said had it been South Dublin rather
Yeah,
than North Dublin, there would have been, and that would have been your professional classes. It
uh,
wouldn't have taken what was it, 40 something
certainly
years
wouldn't. Yeah, yeah.
to have an inquiry.
Hmm. I'm glad that they got the verdict, and I'm glad it means so much to them. I have to say, I sort of don't understand why they're so consoled by that, but I am glad they are consoled by that.
Uh,
Uh,
yeah,
I know Taoiseachs and public figures have to say stuff, but for him to say, heartbreaking tragedy. Eh, uh, for many people, their
No, but
hearts
Jude,
broke.
you see,
Not
no,
Simon
there
Harris.
you go, being your liberal self again. He wasn't referring to himself. I
Whatever
presume
you're
he's been.
referring
It was
to,
a
then, for
heartbreaking
God's sake.
tragedy for the families involved. He
All
wasn't
right,
trying to
okay,
say
we'll
it was
accept
a.
that.
Yeah,
Sure, all right,
yeah.
maybe I'm doing an
Uh,
injustice. I've got a
yeah.
thing about. Let's move on.
You've got a thing. When you keep referring to the bloody Sunday thing is about that getting an apology. What did that change? I agree with
No,
you, but it's
it does matter. I don't doubt for a moment it matters. It's just my brain can't get round why that is or how that can be. For me, justice screams out for
yeah.
revenge even.
I think everybody gets that, but no, it's an admission, sort of, that there was a
Uh,
wrongdoing by the other
uh,
party, and that helps. It doesn't
uh,
solve, but it
yeah.
helps.
Maybe if I was in their shoes, I'd feel differently. I'd see it from their point of
Yeah,
view. Okay, let's move. Sadly, I noticed, incidentally, you mentioned Charlie Hoy. I noticed him in the thick of things on a news clip last night in RTE talking about the kids and saying, oh yeah, and he looked very solemn and even downcast and saying, I knew quite a few of them.
yeah,
Now, a cynic would say he was doing his man of the people thing. I would
yeah.
tend to think, I would take him at his word there. He looked like a guy who had come close to the terrible pain that those people must have endured.
Yeah, he would have known someone.
Uh, anyway, okay, let's move on from Charlie Haughey to BBC's Nick Robinson. Now, I find this a really interesting one because apparently he said that he used the word murder. He asked Lord Cameron, and maybe we'll say a word about Lord Cameron later on. He said, isn't the real risk of where we are now that Western governments appear to back Israel the moment that Israel is under attack, but when Israel attacks and murders tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians, we say the words, but we do almost nothing. Now, I think that's probably a distraction, but you tell me that this word murder was seized on by, was it the Israelis? Was it the Tories? Who
It
was it?
was by Downing Street. They
Ah,
said they were questioning the BBC's impartiality and all the rest, and Robinson was slammed down. But Jude, as
because he
well as
used the
that,
word murder. Because he used the word
murder.
murder. Aye.
And Teresa Villiers, the former Secretary of
I
State,
remember her well.
Cruella de Villiers.
Yeah.
Anyway, she came out with this is disgraceful and so on and so on. But you see there how the debate has been framed. That you're not allowed to say Israel murders, but you're allowed to say Hamas murders. In other words, the whole debate, it shows that this is not freedom of speech and freedom of. Robinson said he put the question. It was a question about morality, and he says he used the language that he has heard other people saying that and so on. And he said he wasn't speaking personally, and it wasn't his own personal point of view, nor was it the BBC's. So in other words, he asked a totally legitimate question, but had he backtrack it on big time? In other words, and I heard yesterday Rishi Sunak an answer to, I think it was George Galloway, or that might have been he says this equivalency between Hamas and the Israelis. Jude, he said it's disgraceful and all. Jude, I don't see a big equivalency between
None at all. None at all.
the actions of Israel and Hamas are, to me, equally abhorrent.
Okay, a couple of things. One is that frequently the BBC and other TV channels or radio channels say they make reference to the war in Gaza. Now,
Yeah.
I'm here to say there's no war in Gaza. There never has been a war. Well, there may have been in the past sometime, but this is, for the last 6 months, has not been a war in Gaza. It's
Oh,
been the Israeli forces slaughtering people. Right? That's the
yeah.
first thing. I think that needs to be said clearly and frequently. The second thing is, ironically, I kind of see the point that number 10 is making. I know, well, I know they're doing it to distract, right? I know they're doing
Yeah.
it so let's focus on this word murder, and then people won't be thinking about what actually happened. Uh, I don't think it's customary for people in where you have political killings to refer to them as murder. I used to get quite hot under the collar during the Troubles here when people said so and so was murdered, and the custom in reporting wars or political violence is not to use the word murder, it's to use the word killed or whatever. Because murder suggests to me, one, a sort of an individual act, and two, you're doing it just because you simply want to kill that person. It's not in a context of a war or a political conflict. Now, that's not to say that the person isn't just as dead at the end of it all. By all means, it's a terrible thing. And likewise, whatever you call it, the pain they've suffered, the pain their family suffered, etc., is just as high and as horrible. But well, I suppose what I'm saying finally is I support Nick Robinson in what he says, drawing attention to this imbalance where whenever Israel slaughters people by the dozen, by the hundreds, by the thousands, it's not reported. When there's say six people killed by Hamas or by whoever, Palestinians, the world's about to end. Now, it's not that their pain isn't equally big, or severe, but it's just the inconsistency of somehow brushing away
Well, but here's the point: it's
slaughter.
not inconsistent; it's deliberate. When the rule used to be in BBC during the Troubles, when the British soldier shot dead somebody, even no matter when it was clear murder, they used to say, "Last night somebody was shot dead, or somebody was killed." When the IRA went out and shot dead a British soldier was frequently murdered by an IRA gang attack last night. So that was the rule.
Well, yeah,
When the
but
British Army was
what would your view be?
what?
What should have been the rule, or what would you see should be the rule now?
No, it was just we used to say "shot dead" in the journal. We and
I think,
let other people. But the BBC used to say a British soldier was murdered. They frequently
yeah,
was murdered by
absolutely.
after an IRA attack last night, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, but moving on, let's get this clear. When you when the beat or not the beat when the Israel can corral out 2.5 million in a place that they can't get in or can't get out, and they drop 6,000 bombs on them. So when they can shell them at their leisure, when they can starve them, they can deny them food, water, electricity, medicines. Jude, you're 100% right. That is murder. When you can do it like that,
Well, I
and
wouldn't use it.
for the
I
BBC
wouldn't.
to tell Mike, to sort of say prescribe how you can ask a question. In other words, they're trying to sort of say, it's like George Orwell has definitely come back to life. Don't believe what you see, don't believe what you hear. Take our version because our ally is the good guy. When we all know your ally is whatever that he's basically a murdering whatever.
Mm.
You know.
Well, I totally agree with that, Pat. But I still think I know it's just a sort of a verbal quibble. But for
Yeah.
example, whenever the bombs were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as 200, what was it, 200, I don't know, many millions of people died. But nobody would say of Harry Truman he committed 1 million or two
Murder.
million murders. It's
Yeah.
just not the custom. Of course, he was responsible for their deaths, just as Joe
Yeah.
Biden is responsible for the deaths of the Palestinians via
Yeah.
Israel. But I
Yeah.
just think that the word is misapplied. Murder usually to me suggests a private setting, at a civilian level
Yeah.
where
Yeah. Yeah.
personal grudges are worked out. But I think that well, we shouldn't be talking about it really because it's a distraction.
But no, but if you read here's where as far as I'm concerned, the substantive point.
Yeah,
Uh, Robertson asked a totally legitimate question
yeah.
from Cameron. If you read it, it is reasonable. And the
Oh,
fact that he got
absolutely.
the fact that he asked the I think the fact that it was such a reasonable way he put it that they don't want a question like that asked because it totally exposes the hypocrisy and the double standards of the British government. That's why the real reason they didn't want the question asked.
Well, I agree completely. I wonder, would the BBC themselves be subject to a little bit of that? They do report certainly the killings in Gaza.
Yeah.
I don't know if they make. I mean, what do you think? Is the coverage of it reasonably even-handed?
No,
Or do
Judith,
you?
the only
I say
person
not
as far
even-handed. That suggests one or the other. Both
yeah,
sides. Somebody
and
said both sides.
Downing Street are sort of saying that that's a left wing bias, and they don't want that. The
Jeez.
only person I think it's actually gone out on a limb on the BBC is Jeremy Bowen. They're and he seems to be sort of fearless as much.
Uh,
And I think he's sort of saying to the BBC, "Fire me at you," but he is saying this is what happened to Israeli and this is what happened in Palestine, and and he's basically sort of telling it as I think he's an absolutely marvelous journalist
yeah.
because I am sure what he's saying is not going down particularly well.
But actually, I think it's the old thing of pictures and words. I think
Yeah,
people, even they don't use the words and say that this is Israel doing terrible things to people, ending their lives, starving them, bombing them. Even they don't uh, come out and say this is happening and it's bad. Even we're left with the pictures each night, and those pictures really impacted, I think, the vast majority of people. I
yeah.
suspect a lot of people in the States, and certainly a lot of people in Britain and in Ireland. How could you otherwise? How? What other possible reaction would you have but disgust and outrage and horror
Yeah.
that those things are
But Jude, if
happening?
you're dependent on the American televisions and the British, a lot of us has been got round by social media. Jude,
Yeah,
the days, and we would have got the old sort of, you know, uh, the sort of narrative that Hamas are the bad guys and Israel is the
yeah,
good guys and all the rest. But a lot of the stuff has been bypassed. And by the way, now it comes into my head, Al Jazeera for the won the broadcast channel of the year at the New York Television Awards,
hmm
and
hmm
this is the channel that Israel has banned from Israel, won't allow it to broadcast. The other one, Jeremy Bowen said something of massive importance about 2 or 3 weeks ago when I was asked about Israel blocking journalists from going into Gaza. He says that usually occurs when somebody doesn't want you to see something.
exactly. Although I'm surprised, Pat. I'm surprised. I don't know if you are about the fact that whether with the permission of the Israelis or without their permission, that we are getting so many shots of the devastation that Palestinians are
Al
suffering.
Jazeera, that's a lot of that's Al Jazeera.
Is it? It's coming from
Journalists
the
on
end and then
site, a
given
lot of
to the
a lot of it
other
is
station?
phone
Yeah.
stuff, Jude.
I see. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
that's a godsend because I was watching last night a documentary on Vietnam. I mean, I just find that such a fascinating subject, and there were scenes there of bodies and explosions and buildings and so on, so reminiscent of what's going on in
yeah,
Gaza. And the suffering of it. I mean, not the Viet Cong, but the North Vietnamese army made an assault at one stage, a huge assault, and they lost 100,000 men, 100,000
Jesus
men
Christ,
in
yeah,
battle.
yeah,
I was
yeah.
just appalling. So I was thinking about that as the equivalent of Gaza. But the mistake the Americans realized afterwards that they had made was allowing the American public to see these terrible things
Yeah.
on their TV screens and to see their boys even on a
The
stretcher
body bags,
or the
yeah,
body
yeah,
bags
yeah.
being coming back. Thatcher made a point of that never happening with the Malvinas. She
No,
simply refused to allow any coverage that wasn't strictly supervised by her. So there was none of the Vietnam type stuff whenever
no,
the British forces were engaged in the
yeah.
Malvinas. So I'm surprised that the Israelis didn't follow a similar pattern and somehow block
Well, they are, Jude,
every.
but they can't block Al Jazeera because Al Jazeera is inside Gaza.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Of
Yeah,
course,
yeah.
they killed hundreds of journalists.
Yeah, they've killed someone like what is 120 journalists,
Uh,
and one of the main Al Jazeera and Jude, I have no doubt it was deliberate. His home was attacked, and his wife and his two sons, I think, are dead.
there's no,
That was just sheer mean spirited, nasty.
there are some heroic people in the world alongside
Yeah,
the only I suppose you would call it animal cruelty of Israel and slaughtering so many Palestinians. Alongside that, you have the heroism of reporters who risk their lives and sometimes pay the price of their lives, and all those medics, whether Palestinian
absolutely.
medics or Médecins Sans Frontières or
Volunteers,
whoever.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
you have to take your hat off to people like that. I mean,
yeah,
that's huge risk, self-sacrifice. I don't know what word you use of it, but it's almost saintly.
yeah,
I
yeah.
can't admire him enough. Okay, let's move on, Pat. What grim scene, God. I said at one stage we shouldn't talk about it anymore a couple of weeks ago because it is so awful.
Yeah.
But Stephen Collins, My cousin Stephen. No, he's not my cousin at all. No relationship whatsoever. Stephen Collins is a columnist in the Irish Times, as you know,
Yeah,
and he has a piece today where he says that electing characters now, characters in quotation
yeah.
marks, to Europe could damage Ireland. And there's a picture then of Mick Wallace and Claire Daly, uh, and it says they have become staples of state-controlled media in the Russian, Chinese, and Arabic language. What do you think of that, Pat? I think I
Absolute
know what you
load of
think. Confirm it for me.
bollocks. Absolute bollocks. It's rubbish. Yeah. What I think Stephen thinks we should all be like Stepford wives. You know, that we're not allowed to think for ourselves. We should all have this sort of consensus that we should all act within an orthodoxy that you're not allowed to think for yourself. Do something. Right. Here's the thing. Mick Wallace and Claire Daly in recent times about Israel and Gaza have been absolutely superb. I don't agree with the thing about Russia. I really genuinely don't about Ukraine. But by the way, it's an intelligent argument they are making in regard to Russia and Ukraine.
And one I've made
Just
myself.
just to divert for a minute, they're saying that there was a deal made between Gorbachev and Ronnie Reagan that if the Iron Curtain came down, that Russia would be free to, within its own sphere of interest, there would be no NATO, more
I've read
NATO
that. Yeah.
stanchions or guards put
Yeah.
up alongside them. And
Yeah.
our NATO expansion? And what happened? NATO, I think, it put up about 100 more right
Oh,
around the
yes.
borders of Russia. So Russia
Maybe.
has a genuine, not that I like Putin, but they have a genuine strategic reason for acting as they've done. But anyway, Stephen Collins is basically saying if we're sending characters to the EU, and of course he used this one that the EU institutions were so much on Ireland's side during the Brexit negotiations and
Yeah.
so on. Dude, they were on Ireland's side because it was in their interests during Brexit negotiations. If France wanted to leave the EU or Germany wanted to leave, it would have been the same. It's basically looking after the EU, the
Aye, that's
EU
true. That's
club,
true,
not
Pat.
Ireland's interest.
Aye, but at
Uh,
the same time, they were. I agree with
yeah,
you.
yeah,
They're looking after their
of
own
course they
interests.
were.
But the South, as part of the EU, were being looked after as a result. So I think that's fair enough.
Yeah,
I don't think the fact that you send critical, what he calls critical representatives to
yeah.
Brussels is somehow rejecting the EU.
No.
What nonsense. The EU, like every organization, needs to improve. And there are some areas of the way the EU operates that, like Jeremy Corbyn, drew attention to those. And as a result, he was damned. He was seen as
Yeah,
being anti-EU. Don't be so
yeah,
stupid. You're able to critique something without saying,
yeah.
I dismiss it entirely. That's what Corbyn did, and that's what Claire Dilly did, and that's what Mick Wallace did. And it brings us actually to a wider question, very briefly, Pat, if you wouldn't mind. They're described as characters. How important is character or projecting an image of yourself as being an individual, a unique individual, maybe a lively individual, an attention gathering individual? How important is that for a politician?
I think it's massive. The day everybody goes to the EU with their shirt and ties on and their suits and their shoes shined and they all think the same and act the same and all the rest. Daily, I think every society needs people who differently question things and all the rest. Let's get just to revert again during the recession. The EU didn't do Ireland too many favors. They didn't do Cyprus too many favors. They didn't do Greece too many favors. They didn't attack Italy or they didn't attack Spain because they were too big. The EU's track record is not unblemished. So Mick Wallace and Claire Daly and people asking, um, Claire Daly referring to Ursula von der Leyen the other day as her genocide, or whatever you call her, Madam Genocide, whatever, Jude, I think it's vital. See the day that we send, sort of little robots.
Hmm.
I think it's vital that every society is represented by people and that are willing to sort of shake the status quo. In fact, see if we accept, that this type Stephen writes, the sort of West Brit Finn
Hmm.
Gael type. I think we're finished.
That's right. I think whenever people elect people because of their personality, I think that's bad news. But I
Mm.
think when people elect somebody because of their policies and they have a personality, I think that's the
Yeah,
ideal mix. There's a
yeah,
theory, some people I was talking to, and they were saying that, the rise of all these, I can't even name them, but the various right-wing autocrats or dictators throughout Europe,
yeah,
that are rising in Hungary and Poland and so on, and
yeah,
Italy even, they're saying that that somehow is connected, that it's got they develop a cult of personality. I
yeah,
I um I think that's a danger. I think you've got to look
yeah,
carefully. What are these people doing? Because you could say about Mick, if you look at our friend Mick, whatever his name is, Mick.
Mick
Come on,
Wallace,
good man.
Mick Wallace.
Mick Wallace, if you look at him, you say you get distracted by his fine flowing locks and so on. But the fact of the
Yeah,
matter is, he's a shrewd guy and he's able to speak out. And as for Claire Daly, she is superb. She is
yeah,
superb in what she says. So I'd be opposed, of course, to simply electing people on their personality. But isn't it great when people have personality and able to use that in the service
yeah,
of speaking the truth, especially the truth
yeah.
of power? Okay, I have several other things lined up here, and we've just got 5 minutes left. Is it worth
Right.
going into this guy? I've never heard of him before, but there's an article on him. Marwan Barghouti, who's a Palestinian, somebody's called him Palestinian Mandela, and he's in prison.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
this guy is referred, as we say, to as the Palestinian Mandela. He's been in jail for over 20 years in
yeah,
Israel. If they've done opinion polls and it's shown that he would be elected president if he was out and if he ran. He's the single most popular Palestinian leader alive. The guy who's the director of the Palestinian Center for Policy and Research says, and yet they won't even think of. In fact, incidentally, he's not a supporter of Hamas, but he's a supporter of Fatah, and yet Hamas says they really should release this guy. So what do you think?
yeah,
Are people like that? There's 8,000 Palestinian people who are in jail in Israel. Should
yeah.
guys like this, should there be a case? Should their names not be mentioned more often, Pat?
I think there it should. Like the Israelis have done a brilliant. No, the Israelis have got this thing called Hasbara. It's professional propagandists, and I think they've convinced the Western world. They have this thing called administrative detention. It's like what do you call it?
Government.
Just take people off the street and put them in jail. No
Yeah,
charges, no convictions, no
we
nothing.
know about that.
You know, and it's been going on. Barghouti apparently he is a very learned man. He is also very capable of sort of negotiating with them. The Israelis don't want somebody like that. By the way, Jude, let's get one thing on the record. People keep forgetting. Netanyahu funded Hamas. He wanted to have, rather than have a unified Palestinian resistance, he got these guys Hamas to go against Fatah and what do you call the other
Hezbollah.
Hezbollah to so they would fight each other rather than fight the old Roman one,
Oh yeah,
divide and conquer.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
like, by the way, it's a factually correct that Israel funded Hamas for a certain time. So,
Mm.
Jude, there's for you. But you see, the thing about Barghouti is he is a unifier, much like what do you
Mandela.
call him, Mandela,
Mandela.
and that makes him dangerous.
Yes, that's right. That's right. They really just simply want to show the world Palestinians as being ignorant, stupid, even subhuman. That's the long and short
Yeah.
of it. Okay, well, we've about 2 minutes left. I don't know, which would you rather do? Would you rather do what the amount of drinking at home Irish people are doing is to sing from pubs, or would you rather do what it's like to be a bus driver around Dublin these days?
The thing I drinking from home, I'll tell you why. I was in last night and then my dear missus just come on, run me into, I said, Aldi or Lidl, I can't remember which one's
Yeah.
there in the Banner Road in Derry. And I was sitting in the car and I forgot to bring my phone. So I was sitting, people watching, going in and out.
Mm,
And right, this was about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the evening. And I would say that of the, say, we'll just make this is a hypothetical, say 50 people went past me.
mm,
Jude, at least 30 of them were carrying some sort of booze, be it a
mm,
bottle of wine, some beer or whatever, Jude, whatever.
mm.
I thought, No, it was Thursday night and it was 6:30, and I would say people had got paid and maybe. But I thought, Jesus, there are a hell of a lot of people buying booze here. Dude, it was the single biggest item, and that's why when you said mentioned it, I noticed people are definitely drinking more at home. Now, by the way, they all say the story just to finish up. They're saying that in the Republic, alcohol consumption is going down, but what they don't say is cocaine consumption is going up. But anyway,
Oh,
that's
that's right.
my theory.
That's right. We
Yeah,
still, in the south, actually, there still are higher per capita number of pubs
yeah.
still in existence, although the drop has been very severe.
Yeah.
When's the last time you drank in a pub, Pat? Went out for an evening's drinking in a pub?
Oh, Jude, it must be about a month ago, Jude.
Oh,
At least that, maybe
jeez.
more.
Well, so would you habitually visit a pub?
No, I've been in a pub.
No, you're not counting. We're
Two,
not counting abroad now. I'm talking about,
no,
say,
no, no.
uh,
I've been in
yeah.
a pub in Ireland twice this year. That would be the height of it. Maybe it's only been once.
I haven't. Maybe it's age, but I haven't been in a pub in years. I haven't been in a pub, and I
Yeah,
used to love them. I used to love them,
yeah,
especially when I was working. A way to
yeah.
round. There was no better way to round off the working week than spend a couple of hours in the local hostelry.
I
Uh,
think only Hungary and Slovakia
uh,
have more pubs than Ireland. I think
but
that's the case.
we're nearly first at something. We're also out of time, Pat. Okay,
All the
good
best,
talking to
Jude.
you. Enjoy your weekend.
And you. See you later.
Okay, try not to be a steer.